Betty and Walter and I had kind of gotten together and decided we wanted to see, try to remember some of the things in the past, especially about the Montgomery family, and just where we came from and what a situation is going to be. I'm going to let Walter has a Montgomery name, so I think Walter can probably look back better than I can, and is just where the Montgomery family came from originally. Walter, would you mind
Yes, I'd be
filling
happy.
in a little bit?
My source, though, is Landrum's History of Spartanburg County, which was written in 1900. And it's published, and you can still get copies of it. It was republished some years ago by Tom Smith, I believe it was Tom Smith. Anyway, according to Landrum's history, the Montgomery family is very well treated in the book. That was because he was related to us. And it's got a lot about the first Montgomery that came to Spartanburg County, whose name was John Montgomery. And according to the history book, he had come over from Ireland in the 1750s or 60s to Pennsylvania. And he lived there, was farming, and he married, and then he became engaged in the War of Independence. And after the war, the Continental Congress paid off the soldiers with land in the Carolinas. And there were a lot of Scotch-Irish families, people, men who had served in the War of Independence, and they moved down to the Carolinas. And if you look just at the names of people from the middle part of, well, most of the North Carolina, and certainly upper South Carolina, they were all that came here after, in the 1780s and 90s. And according to the book, 1785 was when John Montgomery came and settled on a farm which he established out in a town called Hobbiesville. And Hobbiesville is south of Spartanburg, between Cross Anchor and Henry, Woodruff, that area. And he had a number of children. The book tells you all about that. And John Henry Montgomery, who was born in, I believe it was in the 1830s, who was our great-grandfather, grew up in Hobbiesville, and when he was a young fellow, maybe 12 or 14, he was apprenticed to a small store owner nearby. And he worked there for, I gather, a couple of years, and he was a hard worker, and he wanted to have his own store. And he had a fellow who worked with him, and they decided to leave their employer and go off on their own. And according to the story, John Henry borrowed $100 from his father to help capitalize this new business he and his partner were going to go into. And they borrowed somebody's wagon and mule, went to Charleston, and bought the supplies, and came back and established a little store out in the same area. And one time, I was home from New York when I was working at the time, and my father and I went out in the country, just around the Hobbiesville area, and we stopped at a big older house and asked the people, had they ever heard of a place where John Montgomery had started a store. And they pointed to a building, a small building, out in the yard there, and said, yeah, that we just repainted that inside of that building, and it was written on the wall there that I, John Montgomery, and so established our store. And this was in 1845, something like that. Anyway, that was an interesting bit of history. When John, not long after John had started his store, his father and mother and 10 brothers and sisters, or maybe it was 11, all decided to go to Texas. And he couldn't go because he still owed his father $100, and he had to work to pay off that debt. So he stayed, and he married a lady, I think her name was Holcomb, Susan Holcomb, is that correct, man?
Mm-hmm.
And they lived out there. They had several children, and then he later moved into Spartanburg. So that kind of gives you some of the background of how the first Montgomerys got to Spartanburg County.
We're gonna start with your great and my great grandfather, or maybe great. What a wonderful man he was, and we all know that. And one of his traits was his thoughtfulness. When I was sick with pneumonia, I was at 314 Pine Street, and he would bring me a present every single day. Something, of course, I'll never forget. So,
Yeah, I think he was a wonderful person.
maybe you can remember Granddad.
I remember him just barely, do remember him, but
Mm-hmm.
I know, of course, his wife was a very thoughtful person too. His grandmother,
That's who
you
we
know,
really,
she's a person that everyone loved.
and she was really, where she would get things going. The Big Apple, you never probably, you don't remember that maybe, but she would make me do that, get out there and say, shine, which, oh, I used to hate that. But that was, and at Christmas, I had to have a party every single Christmas. And not only did I have one date, she made me invite two. She said, I like to have lots of men around. So she made sure the party was gay and happy. And I don't know whether you remember it or not, I'm sure you.
Oh
Is
yeah,
that-
I have vivid memories of Mamie.
Who?
Mamie.
Mamie, yeah. Well, I remember, you remember Mamie. And of course, the thing that most people ask me about is my trip to Atlanta. You remember that?
In 1940?
Mm-hmm. That's when Mamie passed on. So, it was so sad. She was so excited. We went to the S&W cafeteria. Wonderful meal, and then Aunt Celia and I sat down to look at the movie. I don't know where Uncle Jack was, but I looked over and there was Mamie across the theater. Had collapsed in a movie in one of those chairs. And so they got her and took her out to the lobby where she unfortunately died. So that was a very sad occasion.
But now, the reason you were there was to see the premiere opening of Gone with the Wind, wasn't it?
Right. Indeed.
You made a special trip down to Atlanta, Georgia.
It was a big time, long way for us at that point. And we came back, we were instructed to come by your daddy's house. And we got back, so everybody was over there, the big meeting.
Is that right?
It was one point all about like Lake Summit, your house. And we used to have a curtain coming down those steps. And we would sneak down from downstairs and get behind that curtain and listen to every conversation that went on. One was Frank Holloway asking for Bessie's hand in marriage, and all kind of things went on behind that curtain while we listened. You remember doing that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, that the story about what you're talking about, Frank Holloway.
Yeah.
You know, our grandmother loved people, you know, she was in love getting people together and everybody having a good time. She especially loved parties. But she said, I know when we first moved down from Asheville to live in the house, she had two, the soil conservation was very big in Spartanburg at that time. And she had two people there staying with her. So I guess it was before we came down. The house was empty, and she liked people, so she had the two, Frank and Al. And I remember Al's last name, but Frank was Frank Holloway, and she of course had a niece named Bessie Cheatham, and she managed to get them together, and they, of course, that's why we had
no
relatives on that side. Of course, Aunt Eth was her sister, and she had two brothers that we all got to know from one way or another. I know I lived in Columbia with both of her brothers. Dr. Robert Gibbs, who was a doctor, and he was quite an interesting person in that he said when he first started his practice in Columbia that he was going to retire when he got to be 45 years old. And of course that's what he did. When he got to be 45, he retired. And of course he'd made a good bit of money because he, in his house, he not only saw patients, but he prescribed a prescription and filled a prescription right there in his house. And so when he got 45, to be 45, he just hung up the shingle and retired. And his brother, Hunter Gibbs, he was, I'm not sure what Hunter Gibbs did. Do you remember what he did?
He was a lawyer.
Lawyer, he was an attorney, that's right. But they got along greatly together in their families, and I happened to be there at the time when they died, and I was a pallbearer, I remember, in both of their funerals. I guess we're talking about Miss Bessie, and Miss Bessie always was the life of the party. I know on her tombstone it says she shared her joys but never her sorrows. And that was really her way her life revolved. You know, she
no
didn't.
one ever saw her crying.
No.
Even when they delivered the letter about Frank, they say.
But she sure was a loved person. There's no question about that.
I have a memento of Uncle Miles right now at my boat house. He put his outdoor furniture on the street, and I liked it, so I went by and picked it up and put it in the car and brought it to Lake Summit. It's still there, a little rickety. Don't sit in it if you see it first.
I thought I'd just talk a little bit more about what on the subject I was talking about what a great person and our grandmother was. You know, she loved people. You know, in the she had a at the dining room table. I remember that she had a trick she used to play on the guests. You know, she had a glass that was embossed around the edge of the glass, with little holes, and when she'd have their guests, he would take a drink of water, and it would just dribble down the glass and on his shirt, and he wouldn't know what was happening, but you know, she got a kick out of that, you know, and everybody at the table did too. You know.
I can't imagine this.
Well, she just thought that was a lot of fun to do, but she did a lot of things like that. And, I know she liked older people, but she really preferred as company younger people. You know, she just was a young person herself, and so she liked younger people. I know she had a good friend in Saluda in the summertime. We'd go up there, and she had a real good friend in Saluda that was in Elmira Keenan. And she had a son named Billy Keenan that was my age. And so they got their heads together and decided that they would take us on a trip to New York City. And that was a big thing, you know. So the trip, we went to Norfolk, Virginia, and got on a boat and spent the night on the boat, the ship, going to New York City. And there we went to the Victoria Hotel. I always remember that. It was something that she enjoyed doing for me. Of course, I was the first grandchild. I was the only one that she could do that with as a boy. And with her other friends. We're still friends, Billy Keenan and I, after all these years. But they went, the people on the trip, it was a trip put on by a newspaper man in Columbia. And they all went out to the nightclub or somewhere that night, and they sent Billy and I to the moving picture theater, and gave us some money to get in, but they wouldn't let us in because we weren't old enough to buy a ticket. But it was the thing we went to, maybe it was a special, some kind of that thing, but it was the Rockettes, it was Radio City Music Hall, and we all went there. We got somebody, an older couple. We gave them the money to buy us a ticket, and they did, and so in we went. We had a great time. She liked to do things like that.
How old were you at that point?
I was not old enough to buy a ticket. I think I was 15 probably.
Pretty old.
About the age of my grandson, John Dargan.
What was your friend's name?
Keenan.
Keenan.
Actually.
Shiny Keenan.
Shiny Keenan.
Father.
Mother. Yeah.
His mother.
Yeah, this was Billy Keenan. Shiny is dead now.
Yeah.
And Billy's still alive now. I was a friend with him, I guess.
What you talking about? Go ahead.
And anyway, I was going to mention a little thing in a memory of her. Of course, they had the wedding for Frank and Bessie. They had Lake Summit, and I guess it was the first wedding that was ever had there. And I think maybe one of Montgomery's children had married there too. Who was that? Fran that got married?
Kathy.
Kathy got married there.
The most beautiful bride I ever saw. Kathy.
It was.
Well, talking about maybe.
But that pool, of course, years before that, where that pool is, of course, that's Walter's pool there, and Betty's got all kind of flowers and things in it. But that pool was, back when I was little, that's the pool I learned to swim in. I can just remember to this day, I guess I just, first time I got to swim, I can remember either diving or jumping in there and just paddling as hard as I could to get to the other side. And the thing out is not much more than 10 feet wide, is it? I don't think.
I remember you in your sunsuit and Montgomery also in ladders.
And one of Daddy's
They were
movies.
orange and blue and purple or something.
I remember Daddy took make movies though, that's how we had, it reinforces our memories. I think it's a little bit more than 10 feet broad, maybe 20 feet, something like that. 20 by 20, that's not very big.
No, it's not very big at all.
Well, I
Used to keep fish in there though, I think.
Yeah, on the side ones, the two of them on the side, you know,
Yeah.
there were two small ponds on either side of the main big pond.
Everybody had a good time, that's for sure.
well, anyway, you brought up something that made his half brother was what was his name?
Wasn't Gilchrist?
No,
Well,
what
he
was
was lieutenant, who was governor of Florida.
yeah. Anyway, he left all his money for ice cream on Sundays, don't you remember? Forever after he died, for the children down there. I've been by his place. Have you?
No,
He has a
no.
tremendous, oh, he was a very important person down
Well, he was governor.
there.
That's the one that was governor of Florida?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, Daddy had some interesting stories about, one of them who was a patent medicine, he sold it and traveled around in his old car. And, I'm not, he was somehow related to Mamie, whether he, I don't know. But Mamie had a sister Ethel and two brothers, Robert and Hunter. But they were full-blood siblings. But there was another group that was half-brothers of Mamie. Now, I don't recall exactly. Ted, you know that story? I don't remember that. I can't recall the story, but I think Mamie was very young when she was married. Was she 16 years old?
I believe she was.
Yeah,
And
I think
the story about taking those rings down there to Greenwood,
that's where, I don't know the story. What was
that's
it?
all I know. For her to choose which one he had a
He took some
bunch.
rings.
Mhm. The rings. I remember that. That's all I can remember, really.
Yeah, keep on. How about
Oh,
that?
oh, no, now here's a picture that Aunt Viola so proudly brought to me, and I think it's a beautiful picture of me that her mother had given
Is that a bridal picture?
Aunt,
You think that's a bridal picture?
I don't know. It does look like it could be. I think mother looks like her.
Is the picture I've got, is it, I've got the picture I've got up in the mountains that I was always told was a picture of Mamie before she was married.
Oh,
It's a painting of my fireplace.
oh, that picture, yeah.
Uh-huh.
It looks
Well,
like,
this kind of confirms it,
and
because
that,
I doubted that, because she's very slim in the picture that I have, and she is here too. And
And
all the time we knew her, she was on the heavy side,
Yeah.
not real heavy, but
Yeah.
certainly not slim,
she had that rose, that big flower on her head.
But she led a good happy life, that's for sure.
I didn't even tell you the story I remember about Mamie making her artichoke pickle. When I was a little boy, before it was time for me to go to school, Mother and I, and Rose was just a little one, we would come up and spend the 2 or 3, well, maybe a week or so, 10 days at Lake Summit must have been September. And there was just our family, my father was of course working in Spartanburg, and Mamie would always have 3 or 4 ladies there. And the purpose, they had 2 purposes. One, it was artichoke pickle making time. And it was also bridge, because all these ladies like to play bridge. So as I recall, Mamie had them organized in the morning to do artichoke pickle. Then they would have lunch and they'd play bridge in the afternoon and bridge in the evening. And that's the way, you know, they had this wonderful pickle. And I know my father had a lady who worked at Beaumont Mills make Mamie's recipe for artichoke pickle. And he used to have this lady make cases and cases of it because he liked to give it to his friends and liked to have it himself. And later, that went to the Kirkpatricks. And they had Forge Mountain, and that was there. They used the same recipe. It was Mamie's recipe going back to
Is that right? See, I never knew that.
That's my story.
You know, that's a good story. I had never heard that either, but it makes sense.
Yeah,
I miss it too.
I do. Unfortunately, they have somebody else, you know, they stole that business. And the new person doesn't make it the way they used to. They have it made somewhere, but it's not as good as it used to be. Not following Mamie's recipe.
They don't put enough artichokes.
Well, they chop it up too fine too. But that was one. But you talk about the Big Apple. That was the dance that was very popular in the 30s and the 40s, you know. And now I remember after supper, Mamie used to lead us on going from down the dining room out to the living room behind the chimney, you know, around the chimney. Yeah, they had a record that played the song.
Well,
But anyway, that's what I know about. Another thing, you know, back those days in Saluda on Friday night, there was always a square dance. And Mamie used to always love to take all the grandchildren to.
in that 7-passenger car.
That's right.
Remember we should stop by the Vermonts. I remember that, why the Vermont or something.
But anyway, that was a lot of fun. You know, when we used to have square dances, everybody danced.
She liked,
Oh, she liked all that
she
activity.
liked the men. She,
That was when old Dr. Smith had
Yeah.
square dances, a smaller square dance in his
spike punch.
that's right, he had the spike punch at one end of the square dance floor and the unspiked for the children.
In the gymnasium?
At the other end of the
In the gymnasium.
in the gymnasium, yeah. He could it was in Prohibition, then you couldn't buy any alcohol, but he being a physician, he could go to the drugstore and get the ethyl alcohol and spike it up. It's, you know, I was just thinking about, when the lake summit was built in the early 20s, 21.
No. It started, I think, about 13 or 14. They bought the land. You know,
Yeah, we bought the land.
and then they took a good while to clear it. I think they started building the lake in 15 or 16, something like that.
Yeah.
Because they completed it in 19, didn't they? Something like that. 20.
19 or 20, that's right. And
Now look here, we're about to leave the most important thing of all from about Mamie. Her hobby was painting, and we all have mementos of Mamie. At least we should. So, and this is my favorite right here. She left me in her will 12 beautiful plates.
Really? Isn't that
Mhm.
right?
And she left me a big perfume thing, I'll never will forget it, from Venice now, in her will.
Yeah.
In fact, she left every single one of us, all kind of little teeny, that really weren't.
Souvenirs. Memories. Yeah.
have you still got the 12 plates?
I have all 12.
I knew I had never eaten off of that plate, and so she really protected them.
She always would do the same thing, and I know Walter Carp was the only one really interested in art, so to speak, painting, and he would watch and look and see everything she was doing. So, we can't forget her for that.
You know, ended up, granddaddy, of course, died in 1929, but I guess in the middle 30s, she must have given, she gave Mother the property that we have there now, And she gave Aunt Seal, I assume at the same time, the property that, where her house is. And, I was like, I guess it was in about 30, mid-30s, when, Mother's house was built. They felled, all the logs, it took them all winter to gather up the logs to make that house. They were all, they weren't the locust logs, they were poplar.
Can't you hear your daddy right now saying, now, Seal, now, Kate, this is right, so-and-so, and mother, arguing, and Seal worse. The three of them are really kind of funny together. Mm.
I don't remember that,
Do you
but I
remember
don't
that?
doubt it.
No, you were too young. So, you remember that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's like maybe you said, I guess she was, I don't know if Walter remembers or not, when she was painting, you know, she'd squat down at all the bathtubs in that young house. She'd squat down there with the bathtubs back then, you know, that had the feet on them, you know. And she'd squat down and it wouldn't take any time at all. She'd stop down there, I guess the morning would do it, you know, with get her colors and her easel out and do the side of the bathtub. And if you got one bathtub, it's still
I think so, I think so. Unfortunately, at time, you know, and just not take good care of it, some of them peel off, but we got some, it's a various things that painting. There's a painting that hangs in our bedroom that Mamie did. It's a big painting, some birds she did.
And she gave all of her friends, you know, these plastic cups.
Painted.
Go in the bathroom, it was all painted with roses and
flowers, yeah.
And flowers.
That was a nice hobby.
It was a nice hobby.
Well, at lunch today, Walter was asking about what traits do we think the Montgomery family has passed down. And it was, nobody really, of course, we're all different. But what I said was, I thought it was long life, and me being well, Uncle Walter's mother and Aunt Seal all live forever. And I'm coming along, almost 90. So now we'll see what happens. And also, it's I've heard that people say we're a little judgmental, which I'm sure we might be. Plus we.
Who's been of somebody else, not ourselves.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, that's probably so.
At that time, I paid no attention to y'all.
Yeah.
I was that much older. So, it was just rats.
You know, John Hart Jr., you know, he and I were about the same age. You know, I was a little bit older, but I guess John was the second male born. But John, he took a notion to collect snakes, and he collected every snake. It was known, I think, up there. He had spreading adders and rattlesnakes and copperheads and
turn them loose too in
snakes.
the house, you remember?
No, he did turn. No, he didn't turn them loose. One of them got loose in his house. He had it in his room, and that was the last he could leave them in the room. His Aunt Seal said, "No more snakes in this house." That was the end of it. But John was somewhat of a inventor, and he decided that he wanted to have a method of getting down into the ocean. I mean, into the lake summit, just like, you know, the deep sea divers did. So he contrived to take a water tank, one, not a big one, but a pretty good size one bigger, larger than it would fit on your shoulders by cutting it off, you know, and had the top part of it. And he would added a hose with a pump, and he thought that would be the very thing and cut out a place for your shoulders. And he sent me and Walter, his brother Walter, and anybody else that he could find that would do it down in the water. And of course, that was a terrible thing to do because the pressure is not, the pressure builds up so high when you go down in the water a little ways, it burns your eardrums. But he did that, and that was one of the things that he did. I can't think of anything else. But it's, we used to all be there sometimes all together, but like we were talking a few minutes ago about, you know, Nancy, Mimi had it broken up to where we lived in Asheville at that time, and the Carts lived in Spartanburg, of course, and Walter and Rose, they all lived in Spartanburg. But she devised 1 month for each family, as I remember. Sometimes it'd all be there together. That's what I don't really understand how that would happen, because Walter, you remember being up there.
Well, you remember she built those summer houses,
Mhm.
and there were the summer houses for the Carts, down away from where Aunt Seal eventually built her house.
I thought that was for Granddaddy to take a nap and read his book.
Could have been, I'm not sure why they were built.
Oh.
But there was one that Aunt Seal came a part of her house site, and the one that your mother had a house site, remember? And I know that one at your mother's is still there. Last today they tore it down.
I wonder why I didn't say it.
You remember when the ram that sent water up to the house,
No.
it would go, and I don't understand exactly how it worked, but the water came from the spring, and it wasn't quite enough power to get it up to the house, or it wasn't the proper amount anyway, but that thing would go, and it would go, I hear it in the middle of the night, it would, pam, ka-pam, ka-pam, the ram down at where the summer house is. That's what made me think about it,
Oh, really?
about where the summer house is for the Carts.
Yeah.
Aunt Seal's summer house.
Well, you remember the telephone? That reminds me of the telephone. Nobody had a telephone, and Uncle Walter said, I've got to have a telephone. And so Fiddle had all this done, and big telephone installed down at the Bed and Carts beach at this point.
Wakaluro Beach.
Wakalura.
The name of
Walter,
the beach.
Kate,
And then,
Lucille,
Rose.
Rose.
and then,
Wakalura.
and then, when we finally got telephones, your daddy wouldn't get one, I don't think. So Mother, he advised this thing that we'd have to ring, and it would go up to your house. And
That was to say to come down to the phone.
I know. That part, and the party line, we always had a party line. We were on with the hips,
Really?
they talked a lot. Mhm.
Daddy told an interesting story about when they finished the lake, and our grandfather decided where he was going to put his house. And the place he picked was not a smooth, it was not quite large enough. So according to Daddy, they cut 10 or 12 feet off of the top of the hill, the ridge, and smoothed it out. So they had a bigger place to have a house and a yard. And remember we had what we call the lower terrace, and there used to be a hammock down there, and the butterflies used to come. But they had a nice place to have a picnic down there. And then they used to have, on Sundays, al fresco afternoon parties down at the beach, and Mamie used to love to entertain in the summertime with light suppers at the beach.
Corn on the cob.
Yeah.
And that was big time. I remember the hammocks out on that
Yeah.
lower deck. I spent off for a month, was one of the few. There weren't many people up there in Lake Summit at that time.
No.
We would spend the night out there in those hammocks.
And we used to go up, what children don't do now, go up Green River way up there, do you remember? And
Oh, yeah, we used to.
take picnic lunches and canoe up there, and then also for me, my generation, we used to date Von Diamond counselors. So they don't seem to do that anymore.
Well, he did do, he just a different age group though.
Well, I'm talking about well, I don't know what they do that's like girls now.
Yeah.
That's true.
But Fred has a movie that Fred took of Frank Bell, the chief, and Daddy talked about the early days of Lake Summit and how that Frank was one who kind of organized or commissioned to buy up the land, help them buy up the land, because he was local and he wouldn't cause as much problems in trying to buy people's land. That was back in the, I say the 1912, 1913, 14, long than that. That's a long time ago.
It was. Yeah, almost 100 years.
Yeah.
Well, you know, have you ever counted our family members who live there?
A lot of them. It's
I mean,
nice.
I just, seems to me like the lake is composed of half of us. But I don't know.
Well, I think about, what, about 140, 50 houses in there around the lake. I don't, I haven't.
Just recently, there certainly seems to be the Hendersonville ground where it is.
Yeah, but yeah, if actually, you know, there's not that much change in real estate, is it? There's very few. In the course of a year, it might be, what, 2 houses, 3 houses changing ownership. There's not a whole lot of turnover.
No, not really.
And not too many ones have been built recently.
Yeah. You know the tape that your daddy made. The tape that actually I made it with you. I helped him make it, but I wonder. I can't remember exactly what. How old he was when he did that. I think he was either 80 or 85.
This is one that ETV did?
Yeah. No, the one that we took, you got a copy of it. The tape made about Lake Summit.
No, I didn't get a copy.
I gave you a copy, Walt.
Well, we don't know where it is.
Yeah.
I remember staying it with you, and we always talked about getting young Frank to come by and you know, and see it, but.
You didn't give me
Yeah.
one.
Well, what I was getting at is years from now, when somebody sees this tape, they're gonna say, I wonder how old some folks were when they did that. And so I think I'm gonna tell them that I was 80. I am now 87. And Betty has just mentioned that she's closing in on 90. And I guess, Walter, you're
I'll be 81 in December.
81 in
You know, we
December.
can't hide our ages, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And he always tells people how old I am, but when you reach a certain age, it's just not good
Right.
to know. It's best not to.
But
He tells
those pictures that the one of Frank Bell and my father, that must have been done about 94 or 95. Because Dad died in 1996, you see. But it was a good while ago when you took those.
Yeah, I think it was, I remember, in the tape, I've got to look at it again, because I remember him said, I'm an old man of 80, or whatever it was.
I'll be
Did you?
90.
others think the same way. Didn't you?
Yeah.
Well, that was the nice thing you did, though, of getting those two to record the
Yeah.
early history of Lake Summit.
Well, he's very good about doing things like that. In fact, when I mentioned it, he couldn't wait to do it, you
Yeah.
know, and I think you sort of like that yourself, because, Kate has mentioned something about it, and I've thought about it myself, but I just sort of hated to do it. I didn't look forward to doing it, but I'm glad we're doing it, even though I'm not satisfied with myself, maybe, but anyway, it's.
You know, there's
It's
some
something we
interesting
do.
stories about, we spoke about Uncle Rob earlier. Now, Uncle Rob he was an exceptional person, you know, he was very, very smart. And he had a wide range of interests. And he was the first man to use X-ray in South Carolina, according to the story anyway. That was his story, probably.
That's right.
He also used hypnosis in his practice. And he had a color band that worked for him. And he had him so trained that he'd call him to come in the room, and he'd hand him a piece of paper, and the fellow would open it up, and he'd go into a trance just like that. And then there was some famous hypnotists that used to travel around the country putting on shows. And whenever they came to Columbia, the fellow who was the star on the stage, he wanted to know if Dr. Gibbs was in the audience, because he says, I can't perform if he's in the audience, because he would confuse the hypnosis or something like that. You know, and he had a very powerful personality and evidently ability to, you know, transform people into his way of thinking, of doing.
Like you say, he was very varied. You remember the rocks he had?
Oh my goodness, fluorescent rocks, yeah.
Fluorescent
Had quite a
rocks.
collection. And he, you know, they loved to travel. He traveled, he and his wife Ethel, they traveled all over Asia and in Europe.
Did she have a stroke? Because that was
I don't remember, probably some at the end. When I was in the army and lived in Columbia for 6 months, I went by and spent several afternoon with him. And the house was just full of empty coffee cups. All he did was drink coffee. He didn't eat anything, you know, just drink coffee. But he was a fascinating person to be with. And he thought that Donald Russell's wife had a crush on him, an older man like that.
Yeah.
And she was a very attractive person, but and lived just up the street. You know, his house was off the government.
You know, he had, of course, he couldn't approach what your daddy had in film, but he had a lot of film. Uncle Rob did.
My,
And
yeah.
I remember taking him at least twice down to see the azaleas in Charleston, so he could take pictures of them. And he had most all of his pictures were of gardens, of sunsets, and colorful flowers. And he really thought that there was going to be a valuable collection.
When I was there, we went down to Orangeburg to see the azaleas. And he told me about his idea of taking pictures. You never want to have pictures of people. You want to have pictures of, you say, sunsets and gardens and flowers, but forget about the people. There's no point in taking pictures of people.
Well, who was that man that used to travel with him? He was the picture expert and used to tell us to put on red. He came whenever Uncle Rob came, he came. Colonel McMaster.
Yeah, McMaster, Henry McMaster.
No.
Wasn't Henry, but McMaster. Lived in Columbia. Just
Yeah,
up the
don't you
street.
remember, yeah, and then Uncle Rob went to have dinner with,
Yeah, that's right, he was humble a bit.
uh-huh.
I remember Daddy had a gathering, there was some fellow at Walford, a professor there, that was the same vintage as they were. And he had Uncle Hunter, Uncle Rob, and this man from Walford who was a professor there for many years, for lunch one day at Plum Street. And I just wasn't, they were quite old, all of them, but he got them together and they were having a nice time. Pine Street, built by Gradville. And I think Dad said 1912, that's what I remember. And it has, it's constructed with steel girders. And not many houses built with steel girders, but he wanted something that was going to be there. And I'm assuming that even before then, they had family donors, because Daddy's grandmother, you know, and I think that's the interesting story. On Main Street, the corner of where the elite restaurant used to be, where the Mary Black Hospital, the first Mary Black Hospital was. What's the name of that street, Ted? Where there's a bank now, then the Oakland Avenue. Well, our great-grandfather, John Henry Montgomery, first house, as I understand it, was built on that corner. And later, he decided to build a house over on Church Street. And that's where my father, as a young man, used to go on Sundays because his grandmother had dinner every Saturday with all the men, with all the Uncle Victor, Uncle Ben, they all had dinner every Sunday at her house, which is on where the Montgomery building is now. And so when he moved out of that house, the blacks wanted to use that location for a hospital. So his house, which he had not abandoned but had finished using, was just moved up the street. Just next door, they just pushed it, you know, a lot away. And that was, then Uncle Victor's house was built right across the street, but the Piedmont Club is. And as a little boy, I remember, I didn't know whose house it was, but that's where the nurses in the hospital lived. And that was the first house that John H. built in Spartanburg, as far as I know. And then he built the one on Church Street. But Uncle Victor's house supposedly was designed by our grandfather. And Uncle Victor was like maybe he liked to have a lot of activity and parties. And that's when the house was designed with the ballroom on the top floor. And there were pictures, nice photographs of great big costume parties that Uncle Victor used to have up there. And they'd have, you know, big soirees, and it was a big Gage. And you know, every spring, there used to be the musical festival, the music festival, Spartanburg Music Festival, centered around Converse College and the School of Music. And people would come from different areas around the state, and from Georgia, North Carolina. That was a big 3 or 4 day event in Spartanburg, centered around music at Converse College.
I was scared of him, Colin.
Uncle Victor.
Yeah.
Well, he was very nice to me. I was just a little boy. He would come by 314 Pine Street and take me for a ride out to Graylaw. That was his farm.
Oh, I remember we used to go out there, but well,
He gave me he was big on Jersey cows. Uncle Victor was Jersey cows. Uncle Ben was Guernseys, I guess. Anyway, they both had dairy herds, and they were champions. They were competitive, and they didn't want to have the same breeds, or they didn't want to compete against each other. But they both were competitors against other dairy herds. I mean, Aunt Berg told me about a story. I think they had just gotten married, and she found out that her husband was going off to a dairy, to a show, you know. And she thought she might be going too. He said, no.
That's interesting. I never had heard of that.
I love it.
They always told me the story. When they first had cars in Spartanburg, see, Van was born in 1900, so cars was coming along in the 15, 16, 17 when he was a young fella. He told a story about being on Main Street in one of the cars of that day, and they got in a mud hole and they couldn't get out. And they had to get an ox or something to come pull them out of the mud hole on Main Street. Weren't paid.
Well, that's where Little Vic got the idea of having a dairy farm.
We'd already had it. His father had it.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. But Graylawn was Uncle Victor's country home. Whereas our grandfather had Mount Montana. Uncle Ben was not well, remember. He had bad arthritis. they used to go a lot of places to try to get a cure. I mean, Aunt Murray told me about going to Canada one time, and there was some famous Roman Catholic place where you went to get cured and also have prayers,
Mont Air, that was Big Summit? Okay.
The house that we live in.
Yeah, I knew
That
that
was one
maybe there was another Mont Air.
That's one I assume that Mamie and Bunday, I mean, Mamie and our grandfather named it that.
Oh.
It sounds like Mamie's doing it,
I
but
think it was maybe. She thought long and hard.
like you say, she was a very vivacious person. We were reading a book one night, maybe it was a garden book, about the Whaley sisters, the Whaley sisters. There's a Mrs. Whaley who was a garden person from Charleston.
I was gonna say Ben Scott Whalen, his wife,
They
Emily.
had 3 daughters. And 2 of them live in Hendersonville now. Anyway, well, let's see. One of them is married to, they have the Frank Bell's first house, Leclerc.
Oh, that's right.
Well, you had a party one time at your mother's house, one time, y'all did. Anyway, the first time I ever met you. But, anyway, Daddy was reading in a book one night, and she came across that, they talked about this, one of the Whaley daughters was writing about her mother. And she mentioned that they would come to Spartanburg in the summertime, because he was a clerk for Jimmy Burns. And when Jimmy Burns was finished with his worst work in Washington, they moved back to Spartanburg in the summertime. And because he wanted to have this man nearby, was the secretary or clerk, like that. So they stayed, they lived with Mamie. This was, in the, I guess, the late 30s. Jimmy was, I'm not sure what job he had that time. But, so they read about, Miss Montgomery, say Miss Montgomery. But you mentioned Frank Holloway. He was one of, like you say, this. I'd forgotten he was a soil conservationist fellow.
Remember when the little Frank came and swiped things out of your pocket,
Who would do that?
the Frank
Frank.
Holloway, the little.
Oh, the little boy, yeah.
He wasn't so little, he got to be big.
I know, of course, that was mainly entertaining them.
Well, did you know John Henry was your
Great-grandfather.
great-grandfather? Did you know him?
Fred, he died in 1902. I
Well,
was
no,
born-
no, that's right. I don't have to skip the general. Well, John Henry, was he the one that we talked the story about throwing his plow down and
Yeah,
I've got it straight now.
yeah. That's when he decided that he'd do better selling fertilizer than using fertilizer.
Yeah.
I remember Lois in the day, right, they called her Lois. And
That was his first child by his first wife. His only child by his first wife.
is that what it is?
Uncle Victor was married 3 times. Lois was his daughter by his first wife,
Mm-hmm.
and then she died. And then he married again, and Victor was his first son by his second wife.
Oh, I didn't know all that.
And then he married, then she died, and then he married Eloise.
And of course, they had no children.
That's right.
He had some other children with somebody from Greenville.
Right? Eloise, no, she was from Greensboro.
No. This second wife was from Greenville.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
It's a well-known name. Well,
No doubt Teddy had it in the list.
we haven't gotten around to talking about our Christmases in the old days. And so one of the main things we did was now we've got to get ready and go to Walter's to look at the presents. And so that was a must, no matter what. I think how they must have gotten up at the crack of dawn to arrange all those presents.
You and Rose had to get up out here early.
Well, they had help, but that was big deal.
Oh.
Why that was such an important thing, I never understood.
I never did either. I don't know how they ever went to bed that night. All those things to remove mercy.